I am not a philosopher. My background and training is not in philosophy, but what I really want to try and touch on is a little bit more, I guess, around the business application of making AI more understandable. As Richard just very kindly mentioned, one of my core jobs and things that I do is to try and bring together multiple almost assets of people together to try and solve common business problems. Trying to work together in a way to be able to really address complex business problems and try and make it more understandable for people as well, whether that be data science, whether that be engineering, whether that be product owners, end users as well. And I wanted to talk a little bit around, how can we make that more of a reality? How can we make it more accessible? My background really actually stems from more like the advertising side, web design, content curation. And I think there's a lot of parallels that we can draw from that area. There's a lot of learnings that we can take from industries that have lasted a lot longer than what data science, AI is as we know it is today. And the lessons learned from those as well. And I think the big one for me is probably actually starting off with talking about advertising. So I'm going to bring up a few adverts, and hopefully some of these might be quite recognizable to some people. Compared the market, brought out the advert around, compared the Meerkat, a bit of a spoof advert sort of style. And, I remember one of the things that whenever I saw this advert, it was that saying that this Meerkat always had was simples, with a little streak at the end. And, it just resonated with people so much, it almost became like pop culture. It was a pop culture reference. And for many, many years, you couldn't go a week without somebody dropping that into conversation. And automatically, when you see this, you just know it. You can almost hear it in your head if you ever have seen this advert. Another great example is a Coca-Cola advert. Whenever I see this advert, for me, it just means, yeah, Christmas is coming, especially Christmas advert with the truck going down the street. A little random fact, as much as I know some people think Coca-Cola actually made Santa red, there were, before Coca-Cola did it, Santa was depicted with red, but I think they cemented the actual image as we know it is today. But they haven't necessarily reinvented the wheel in that sense. But yeah, I thought I'd share that little fun fact which I found out the other day. Another one is this, and I thought this was brilliant. I saw this on LinkedIn, and I think if you know what Kit Kat is, you know the slogan, have a break, have a Kit Kat. And you just get it, no words really, other than obviously Zoom call repeatedly. But this really got me thinking in two different aspects. Firstly, all these adverts I've shown, it almost, you can almost hear what the adverts are saying in your head. It resonates with everyone in some sort of way. And in particular, and to take on to the second point, this particular advert for me really resonates with me because things lockdown, especially and COVID, the whole brave new world that we live in. This is exactly how my calendar looks like. And even though I know in theory it shouldn't be back to back, Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call, I didn't let that happen. And it made me ask the question, why do I let that happen? Why does that continuously happen in my calendar? Why don't I start all these Zoom calls from being booked in, from 9 to 5 pretty much every single day? And this is where there's another pop culture reference here, so apologies. G.I. Joe, cartoon from the 1980s. At the end of it, there was this public service announcement that G.I. Joe would come onto the screen and he'll do this little talk around, now you know, and knowing's half the battle. Things like, if you're going outside and it's sunny, put sunscreen on. But so many times I've gone outside and not actually put sunscreen. I've done pop into the shop, it won't matter. Even though I know I technically should, but I don't still. Another great example of this is this image here. If I ask you a question, which one's longer, A or B, automatically it looks like B is longer. But those of you that have seen this sort of image before will know that both lines are exactly the same, but yet instinctively we still want to say B is longer. So why is that? Why is that the case? And this is where it really takes me on to this term that was coined by a couple of people from Yale University, the G.I. Joe fallacy. Obviously, the fallacy itself is that knowing is half the battle, but it doesn't necessarily account for some of the cognitive biases and the experiences that we all have. And I think what that shows that actually knowing isn't necessarily half the battle, and they speculated that actually it's perhaps closer to about 10th of the battle, which for me makes more logical sense. as much as I might see a bit of information, it might not necessarily resonate with me. And I think if you think about this, particularly from an AI perspective, we see very similar trends when people look at AI and machine learning algorithms and outputs of that, especially within a business context. People still have some element of fears and biases against that, and for me, that's a really key thing. Biases have come in all different shapes and forms, but fear is a very emotive feeling for people. And especially with AI, there's a lot of various fears. Now, some of these on the screen will be talked about from a sort of more explainability AI perspective. Some of these are more from an understandable AI perspective. And obviously a big one on there, as you will hopefully see, is AI will take me out of a job, which we know is not true, but yet these people have got these fears about AI and machine learning and data science and all these clever things that they don't actually understand. And I think a lot of it stems from the unknown of it all. It feels very new, very raw, very inaccessible. We talked earlier about this black box thinking. So we have to ask ourselves the question, how can we demystify this? How can we start to bring people on board onto a journey? And I think all the presentations so far talked about taking people on a journey in some way or another. And I think this is really important. So I want to try and address this from two different perspectives, almost from a journey of taking people on board and getting them to understand why is it that it is what we're doing within an AI space, but also, if we're not taking certain people on that journey, how can we try and cement an element of trust in what we produce at the end to make it as impactful as possible? And we talk about it from a journey perspective. For me, there's, very simplistically, this is very, very simplistic, but there's three key things to really think about. One of the first things is, it's about the jargon. There's a lot of jargon, and people like to almost throw out some words sometimes to be able to make it seem like they are the smartest person in the room. They know everything there is about data science, AI models, etc. But I think the reality is that if you're talking to especially non-technical people, a lot of these words will put people off, because again, if you think about the fear factor, it's the fear of the unknown. I don't know what that means, and automatically people will shut down and switch off. So especially using words like fuzzy algorithms, fuzzy logic, I think this one always makes me laugh. I think a lot of people will genuinely recognize what these terms are, but to a non-technical person, the moment you say fuzzy, it makes it sound a bit, it is and it isn't, it's kind of there, kind of matches, which doesn't really build confidence in people, especially when we're trying to bring them on board into what we're doing. So it's about cutting that jargon out, trying to make it more accessible, trying to make it more understandable from a perspective and speaking the language of the intended users at the end. It's the same thing when we talk about how we visualize data. Any chart should always have labeling, like titling and things like that, explaining it in a human way, in a process-driven way, a person way, rather than a more platform system way of thinking. Another one is defining a vision. There's been a lot of times when I've been on projects where if there hasn't been a vision, it doesn't fundamentally work. The actual AI machine learning product that's developed it might be fantastic, but falls short because people aren't invested in the idea. They don't know why this exists, how it applies to them, and that becomes a major risk. It means that we don't necessarily drive enough value from what we're trying to do, especially within organisations. So taking people on board to be able to really define not only what the end output is, the wireframing exercises, lo-fi, hi-fi designs, some of that learning from a UX perspective that people can take, but also actually mapping out the actual journey of information. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to provide and within AI is a value stream to an overall process. And it's not the start and the end, it's part of a more holistic journey that we try and take people on. So really be able to define where those touch points are, where is it that will produce new data, what interaction do people have to it, and how do we keep them as informed as possible. Another one, almost like in the sort of more old school sales way of thinking, customer's king, exactly the same context still really, it's the user is king. if we don't build something for the user and keep them involved, they're not going to be part of that journey, and trying to drop them in at a random point without the context of what already has happened means that they'll get confused and lost along the way. And there's different ways to be able to try and manage that. But I think one for me that really does speak volumes in terms of the learning of that is, it's using a methodology like Scrum, Agile. The only reason why I wanted to bring this up was purely because if you look at things, what it's saying, it's a iteration. There's an element that we work on, we produce, we test, we review it with people before we start a new iteration. And in a way, it's kind of representative of what a assisted learning model would do to be able to actually learn and grow and have more enhanced insights and outputs on the other end when it produces the insights that it's meant to. And in the same way, we can almost treat people in that same sort of way, not only people to get them understanding about ethical uses of data and embedding those behaviors. It's almost like what Reid was saying earlier, it's more of a cultural thing than necessarily a process that we follow. It's about embedding those behaviors, but also it helps enhance what we produce and almost enables the AI engineers to be able to intercept and almost consult on behalf of future data practice. So, that's very procedural based, and it's almost like taking it, on that journey piece. But, what about the actual practical use cases of making AI more understandable? And I think everyone so far today has spoken about, almost this mindset. This mindset is not a process. I think Renee probably most eloquently put it at the beginning of this evening's session when she was talking about people need to have more authentic view of, or be more authentic when they're looking at ethical AI. And I think this is part of that. It's about making sure that we're distilling the right mindset, the right behaviours within people. But what about those that don't necessarily, that are not part of that same journey, that haven't been part of that? People that just suddenly see some form of front end, some form of application or dashboard or whatever else it could be with some AI capability. How can we really sell that message non-verbally? Because they won't have the opportunity to speak to people. So how do we really distill that in the right way? For me, there's sort of three key things. First off, there's no denying it, it's about storytelling. Now, newspapers are fantastic at telling stories. There's no denying that. They can really play people's emotions. Yeah, with this, obviously, there is sometimes an unethical way of viewing this, and how it's produced and how it's demonstrated is not necessarily always the right way of doing it. And this is a good example of what kind of bad looks like sometimes. But they're very good at playing with people's emotion and triggering reactions to it. And I'm not saying that we should follow that exact methodology, because that's not the case, but there's definitely a good example of good storytelling, be it obviously necessarily unethically. But if you think about it from the point of the business, the dashboard should be able to tell a story just by painting by numbers, whether that be data or, like in terms of, ones and zeros, or whether that be more qualitative data. So information and, like responses to survey, for example. Another thing, and I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, about bringing UX, UI capability when we're talking about AI, because they're the people that are most akin to be able to translate the complex to the uncomplex, trying to really make it resonate with people in the right way. And there's some key things in here, making it simple, really getting it as clean as possible, minimizing the amount of information on the page. It's not about bombarding people with information. It's about providing concentrated information, making it engaging, getting people to interact with it. And there's a saying within this as well, a user interface is almost like a joke. If you need to explain it, it's not that good. So yeah, I thought I'd share that as well. Because I think it just really demonstrates the point I'm trying to make here. It needs to be clean. Final point, and I like to explain it as the 3 levels. It's about how can we visually embed the right behaviours when we're talking about actually distilling something that is where people haven't been part of that journey. And within a dashboard, you almost want 3 different key areas. First one, building trust, like a trust exercise. You're showing data which is understandable and relatable already to people, the information that they might actually necessarily already know, the KPIs, distributions, and things like that, information which is sort of second nature almost to these end users. Once you build up that trust by showing information there, you're talking a common language, you can then start to introduce some insight, new information that's been generated off of ML, machine learning, AI models, to really, distill, new information for them to be able to show, actually, have you considered this part, whether that be a forecast trend, what could look like in 2 days, or whether that be like a what if analysis almost. The third one and final one is, almost providing an action, a trigger. Now we know this information, you want people to use that information in some sort of way. But providing a call to action, it means that people actually using that information in a useful way. That could be something like a prioritization. These are the top 10 tips or sites that you want to visit because there could be potentially a problem here. So rather than letting technicians run rampant and everywhere, you can then concentrate that effort and increase efficiency.
Hi, Paul. Sorry to just interrupt, being conscious of time. Yeah. Is it okay if I just go ahead with the summary, or you want to just say a few words before?
No, that's fine. I was literally just going to wrap up with saying, to summarize, take a break, have a Kit Kat, take a step back and learn, iterate and grow. Create a buzz, get people excited for something, and obviously keep it simple at the end as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Paul. I totally understand we are out of time, but we understand that how you are, leveraging and understanding the fears of AI and then helping organizations to, build that AI insights with the help of dashboards and making them understand in not technical terms, but rather what people can understand, including the non-technical stakeholders and people who could, use the whole power of AI into their apps or dashboards, etc. And thanks for giving those quick tips on the front end that people could use to, give the insights non-verbally. That is what we would look for.